Let's go mother f***ing shopping, y'all.
This will be the new standard that we open every single episode with Andrew dropping an F-bomb.
I know the last one had an F-bomb in it too.
Yep, I'll just have my bleep button ready.
You know, one thing that we should mention, housekeeping detail about these podcasts is we record them a little bit ahead of time, and then the order they get released is kind of up to your genius intuition.
Let's call it that. Sure. Genius intuition. Yes.
Yeah. Cause cause I noticed there were two that weren't exactly in the same order. And the other thing I noticed is very important. Although this could get, who knows when this episode is going to get released exactly. But in the last episode, I said I was just getting which was yesterday, the day we're recording this. I feel like we're in like a Christopher Nolan movie or something. But yesterday, before the day we were recording this, I said, I just got my Worlds read out from last year and I'm like wicked out of shape. However, at the date people are listening to it, that was no longer true. And I'm in considerably, I'm in considerably better shape.
Are you worried about your pipe major watching that and being like, wait a second?
Yeah. Guys from the band occasionally listen to this, and I just want you to know. Well, I was not in good shape at an embarrassingly late date. It was not as embarrassing as the date the podcast actually came out. Now, with my luck, this episode is going to be released like the Thursday, like the day before the Worlds.
Yeah.
With my luck.
Like, I got to start thinking about learning my tunes.
Yeah, I better start thinking about popping in the old band read. Anyway, just so everyone knows, that's what we're dealing with here. So anyway, Chapter 4, time to go shopping.
Yes. We open up with a quote from Benjamin Franklin in which he says, "The best investment is in the tools of one's own trade."
You think Benjamin Franklin
I have no problem.
Said that?
There are so many Benjamin Franklin quotes that you kind of go, wait a second.
Yeah, exactly. He was either like, well, he was a brilliant guy, wasn't he?
Must have been. My favorite legends about him are that they wouldn't let him write the Declaration of Independence because they were worried he'd sneak too many jokes in there.
Right.
Which makes me wish he'd been the guy.
Which makes it hilarious that they then selected Thomas Jefferson. Yeah. Super, super dry. Although not really. Thomas Jefferson, like, he wrote some pretty nice satire in his career. And like, you know, they were also viciously funny in how they criticized each other constantly during the process of, constructing, basically, I mean, the number one government in the world. You know what I mean? I just said that to try and trigger. Yeah. But no, but they were vicious.
Yeah.
In like the things that they said about each other. So they were all pretty funny, I guess. You had to be. You can't take yourself too seriously and like, forge unifying documents.
I gotta say, you can't ever take yourself too seriously, regardless of what you're doing.
Yeah. So what are we talking about again?
So we're talking about how Benjamin Franklin wanted
the quote,
national bird to be a turkey instead of a bald eagle. But we're also talking about what kinds of stuff we get to buy, which I've got no problem buying stuff for bagpiping, let me tell you right now. It's kind of a constant problem, actually.
Is this chapter, I mean, you get to buy a couple things, but it's also for the bagpipe consumerists. Is it maybe this chapter is a bit of a disappointment?
Yeah, well, when we get to some of the lists of what not to buy, I'll enjoy telling you how many infractions I've made against that list.
Okay. All right, let's do it. All right. Give me what you got.
Yeah, let's open up with, we're getting into the right frame of mind here. The first step toward achieving our goal is a tidy and distraction-free space to practice in.
Yeah.
So, starting there. Yes. You say distractions are the junk food of focus. So I'll tell you, for me personally, maybe to get the ball rolling on that, Andrew, right now, I'm very fortunate that like where I'm recording from right now is actually a shed in my backyard that over the last few years I've fixed up as my workspace. And it's like my man shed too, so I get to practice out here. It's very convenient for me. My pipes are always out. Nobody out here. It's just me. But it used to be that my best place to practice was in my truck with practice chanter, obviously. I'd hop out of my truck for the piping, but there was nowhere for me at home. Absolutely nowhere. And so the best thing I could do was just always have a practice chanter in my car, and just practice when I was out working. So, where you find a space, it might be different for all kinds of people. It might be that your local park is your space, but what can we say about trying to avoid distractions?
Man, it's like it's such a key ingredient to really being successful. Is you have to find a place where, when push comes to shove, you can focus. So the dojo cave is this mysterious room with no windows that I just kind of stumbled across last time. Carl Donnelly, the secret dojo. What do they call those guys? He's like a secret.
He's
secretly does all the
power
behind
the throne.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, exactly. He's sort of the hand to the king. Wait a minute. No, that came across wrong. But anyway, he decided to move to France. So when that happened, I decided to move the office to someplace small, and just all I needed is just a square box. I was also watching a lot of the Casey Neistat vlogs, and his space was so cool, and I wanted a cool space like that. So anyway, I found this cool room. I think, see those bricks? They're painted over, but I'm pretty sure those must have been put down significantly before the Civil War. Right there.
Yeah. Speaking of 1776, I think this place is the first ever studio in
Troy, New York was maybe, I'm not quite sure if it was a big deal in 1776, but certainly by the 1800s, Troy, New York.
It's like that. Those are chunks of the original Plymouth Rock right there.
Yeah, could be. But fun fact, Troy was the richest city in North America, or the second richest city in the world or something at some point per capita.
Oh. Was it
not anymore?
Or?
Tell you that much.
Yeah.
Collars. Troy made collars. And there would have been a lot of commerce passing through Troy, because Troy is kind of where the Hudson River kind of comes to an end. And the Erie Canal sort of begins nearby, but they didn't have the Erie Canal back then. So so all the lumber would have probably come through this area. That's a good point. And other natural resources in order to make its way to other places. But I digress. What were we talking about? Yes, that's where my office is.
It's on point.
Yeah, at some point we'll get around to talking about what we're talking about. But even in here with no windows, and it's all set up exactly for operating the business, even in here I really struggle with distraction, because my phone still works in here, and so does my internet. So when things get serious, you have to get serious about consciously eliminating all distractions. I have a little bit of a checklist. That I can follow, when I really need to discipline myself to get things done. And, and it'll all depend on what exactly I need, but, closing out all those browser tabs, making sure all the chat apps are exited out of, you can physically turn off your phone, and then, you only turn on what you absolutely need to focus. And then if we're talking about practicing the bagpipes, usually you don't need the internet for that, for the actual good, intense practice. So you can just power off your devices and then get down to work and actually get the practicing done. But you really have to have that. And so many pipers that we've come across, that's just an ingredient that they haven't figured out, and it's not going to work out well for them until they do. Like my kids, you'd be surprised. Oh, my kids come in and bother me a lot, or my pets come in and bother me a lot. It's wait, you can't figure out how to practice without a pet bothering you? This is a big problem. This is a way bigger problem than, the fact that you have a bunch of crossing noises, or, that you're struggling to memorize. I mean, it's we have to figure out where we can get that practice time undistracted. But so
there's
gotta figure that out.
There's a sentence in here that I'm trying to find right now that I just thought was a lovely little piece of writing, that you say something like, feed and water your kids, feed and water your pets, and feed and water yourself.
I think it says
That's nice. I like
feed and
that.
water your spouse. Does it not?
Yeah, I thought it said self, but maybe it says spouse. Either way, it's a great
Yeah.
sentence, well written.
Hang on.
But I do like on the note of having a practice space, I appreciated that like point number 2 in your list of suggestions for setting up your space is put a sign on the door. Partly because for those of us who might be kind of in spatial poverty, maybe there aren't a lot of options, you know. The bedroom can be your dedicated practice space if it needs to be. A sign on the door can go a long way in saying like, for these next 20 minutes, this is my dedicated practice space, you know, and then outside of those 20 minutes, it can be another, you know, it can be the kitchen or whatever else it needs to be.
Yeah. Yep.
And yeah, you did mention turning your phone all the way off or using airplane mode, etc. Because you know we need to have our tuning app out. I was just doing that.
I'm not falling for it. I'm not falling for
it. And then there it is. Well, that's not the sentence though. But you do point number 7 on that list is to feed yourself, and I might suggest that that's something like a stand-in for a larger idea, which is simply take care of your other needs. So like feed yourself might also mean and use the restroom, you know, and you know whatever else you need that's not so that you're not being distracted by other stuff is the idea, right?
Yes.
Okay.
You don't want to practice. You don't want to practice your pipes, you know, while you have the casserole in the oven. You know, it's like
totally.
I mean, unless the casserole is definitely going to take.
Sure, if it's a 45-minute bake and you just put it in, then that could be a great time. Yeah.
But that would be. I think it'd be generally a bad time to like make your general practice time is like, oh, if I have a little bit of spare time while I'm cooking dinner, I can play a couple tunes on the pipes. Like that could be cool just for fun, you know.
Sure.
That could be a cool fun thing that you do is you just have the pipes nearby and you're killing time while you're making dinner, so you want to play a couple tunes. Like that could be fun, but for real practice, which we talked about in a recent episode on the podcast, like real practice is uncomfortable and requires total focus to do it right.
Yeah. So planning ahead something dedicated makes a lot of sense. Though I do like Sean Cunningham is the whistle tutor guy, and he has this thing that he pushes for where you always have a car whistle, always have a whistle in the car, so you can just pop it out and play whenever you're waiting for something. I love the idea of having a kitchen practice chanter or something like that. Just like it's on top of the fridge, so you can grab it whenever you want to bust through a tune. But I do like this, Andrew. I feel like this is insightful, where you mention time spent inside of your dedicated practice space does not score you any points unless it's actually focused and helping you improve.
Yeah,
I see that.
We all
in my
know
own
those
life.
People. Yeah,
I'm one of those people
where like they just can't ever put the phone down. You know. You even probably know those people at band practice, right? They just can't put the phone down. And it's like,
enough.
And I definitely go through phases where, let's face it, I've become a little too dependent on the old phone, but like, you know, it's important. And I think that's probably normal and probably the way the world is right now. But then eventually you have to tell yourself, bro, it's like, you got to put that phone down and just refocus your energies on the things that are important just for a few minutes. But you can't be texting with your wife about, you know, the things on the honey-do list while you're practicing. It's just not going to work. It's multitasking.
You know,
maybe we can do a more in-depth episode on multitasking at some point, but we can't do it. It doesn't actually work.
We talked about Bob Ross a little while ago and the joy of painting. And just on the same theme of public access television in the United States, you remember that absolute banger from Sesame Street when Ernie wanted to learn how to play the saxophone? Put down the ducky. You got to put down the ducky if you want to learn the saxophone. You got to put down the celly, to put down the phone if you want to learn to play the bagpipe, something like that.
I use that every time people at the dojo start to insist that digital tuners are good. I start to bring that song back into circulation around the dojo. Yeah. You know, got to put down the tuner if you want to play rock and roll. You know what I mean?
Oh, there we go. Put down the tuner. Nice. So then we hit the record.
It's just such an insultingly.
Yeah.
It's just the Sesame Street song is just so insultingly like correct, but it just is so insulting because it's a kid's show. And Bert is telling you to put down a rubber ducky. And it's just so great. It gets to the heart of the matter. I love it. Anyway.
It really does.
Yeah, let's talk about recording.
You mentioned that Reed Maxwell, who's the drummer with Simon Fraser, once said that he said, focus on the field and enjoy the performance later when you listen back to the recording. And then you also say that's where improvement lies, in listening back objectively. Having read this chapter, I did a session yesterday and I recorded way more than I usually would have and listened back and went, oh man, is my bottom hand out of tune. I'm so used to focusing on my top hand because that's usually where the tuning problems are. I'd kind of just stopped paying attention to my bottom hand, but my B's and my G's were nasty. And if I hadn't been listening back, wouldn't have even thought of it.
Yeah, I think a lot of stuff comes out in the wash and you're able to get perspective. I think when you're playing, first of all, when you're playing, you want to devote all your focus to doing the things that you're trying to do. Okay. And therefore, the more analysis that you do, the more bandwidth, let's call it, is getting chewed up by analysis and not by focusing on the things that you want to do. I think that was Reed's point. I think that's Reed's point. It's like, you don't want to be, when you're competing on the field in a top grade 1 band and you're trying to win the world, it's like, you don't want to be like thinking about, oh, I think somebody near me, I think their B is slightly flat. And like, that's, you don't want to be, or I think or in the drum corps, maybe, like, I think one of those roughs was a little bit sloppy or something. It's like, man, you don't want to use your bandwidth to think about that stuff because that's already happened. And it's time to just ensure that no other bad things happen and that lots of good things happen through your focus and tending to business the way that you need to do it. And so we don't want to spend that analysis while we're actually performing or practicing if we can. We want to be allocating our bandwidth to playing the best that we can play. But even putting that aside, let's say that analysis was possible. Well, what about the deep analysis that you want to do? Like we've talked in the past about how rhythm is the foundation of a lot of the different fingerwork fundamentals that we're going for. So yeah, it's true. You might be able to notice when you play that that you're having crossing noises, but it's only going to be through some real in-depth analysis, taking the 100,000, 10,000 foot view of what you are actually doing, where it might occur to you like, wait a minute, the rhythm doesn't seem right either. And I wouldn't be surprised if by just taking the rhythm more seriously over the next, couple of practice sessions, if things might, get a little bit cleaner and maybe that's the thing that I'm missing. Or it could be other simple things too. Like, crossing, you can make your laundry list. You might even notice it while you're in the act of playing, but then maybe listening to the recording, you could just come to some subjective conclusions like, wait a minute, I just need to relax. I'm trying too hard here. And then by doing so, a lot of these things might smooth out a little bit, and it'll also put me on the right kind of footing I need to actually be able to move forward and improve this thing. So anyway, recording is super important. And in my opinion, should be a fixture in your practice room. And then in the book, I say it's to the extent where you should have a dedicated recorder that stays in that area that's always primed and ready. I can see mine from right here. It's armed. It's ready. If I wanted to record myself playing my pipes today, I would have one button to press and it would capture.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I don't have to open any iPhone apps. I don't have to install any gear. I don't have to ask my wife to borrow the USB cable because it's not charged. The recorder is always primed and ready in the practice room to grab a really nice, high quality recording that I'm going to enjoy listening back to. Well, I might not enjoy it, Bob, but but the sound quality will be conceptually enjoyally.
I got one of these after talking to you a while ago because I'd saved one of my old phones, which I used to always keep my phones in really protective cases so I can resell them to try to get some value into my next phone, But this one time I was like, wait a minute, I'm going to hang on to this one. And initially my motivation was I'm going to put all my social media on this phone So then I can turn off social media when I need to and put it in a drawer, and kind of keep the two things separate.
I love the idea, but it doesn't quite work.
It doesn't. And I have a highly addictive kind of personality anyway. Like, man, I'm in danger all the time. But now I'm very happy to have it as like a dedicated recording device. That's what I used last night too. Just pop that thing into it and hit record. It's very handy. Yeah,
I mean, so I think that you're going to take baby steps to get started. And I think that little attachment for the iPhone is really good.
I like it a lot, but it's also not necessary. I have a friend, my buddy Chris, who is just he's a solid piper. He just became pipe major of the Salt Lake Scots, and he's one of these guys who plays for dancers. He can go for hours and hours, and he just sounds so solid all the way through. Like he'll have a second set of pipes so he can swap them out because he can still go when the instrument's worn out. He's entered during COVID. He did a ton of contests, and he would put his iPhone under some blankets. He'd just put it on the bed and put pillows and blankets on top of it, and then he could play in the same room, and the audio came through great just from the built-in mic. So there are things you don't have to spend a bunch of money to be able to record yourself for sure.
Yes, although a little bit of money can go a really long way.
Hey, that's the point of the chapter, right?
Yes. All right, let's keep going. What else we got?
Yeah. Yep. Well, the one other thing that I liked about that section is you did mention that it can simulate the nerves of competition or performance to record yourself. I do. Yes. I do that all the time. A trick on myself. Be like, I'm going to imagine there are 1 million people watching right now. Can I play it under pressure? We should do an episode on that too. We should do an episode on that
for sure. There's a couple of principles that if you adhere to them, the recorder can be a phenomenal tool for dealing with performance anxiety and nerves and helping to train yourself to produce your best when you are under pressure. There's a couple of key principles that are pretty fun, but that's just a teaser for a future episode.
Nice. So then what about metronomes? You mentioned possibly purchasing an amp. Do you feel like that's the best versus an earpiece that you could use to hear your metronome? Tell me about that.
Yeah. So the earpiece is definitely perfectly fine for starting. But then the amp is the best because if you are recording yourself, it's logistically very difficult to both record your pipes and something that's coming through an earpiece, unless you want to invest in like some bizarre multi-tracking technology. And by the way, if like the multi-tracking synchronization ever gets even slightly off, then you're not going to get the results. So the amp is just really good to have for playing with the metronome. And then just a brief timeout to discuss, why we advocate the metronome. It's because the highest ideal you can achieve as a piper is to achieve pure automaton robotic status with your playing, with no expression in it at all. You just want it to be perfect robot, like almost like artificial intelligence was playing. That's what we're going for, right? No, that's not it. Yeah, that's people attempt but fail to criticize the dojo method because of our use of metronomes. But what we do with the metronome is we train our sense of timing with the metronome. Okay, and it's really important thing. And the metronome is one of the it's the only reliable measuring stick. That's not true, actually, now that I think of it. But it's the best consumer grade measurement of how accurate you can be with your timing. And it's a key element of developing really good bagpiping technique. And so when we practice, we want to have that metronome nearby. And it's easy to play with a metronome on the practice channel, but it's much harder to do on the pipes because the pipes are loud. So we need a loud metronome that we can work with when it's appropriate to be working with the metronome. So yeah, we definitely want to have an amp. You can see mine right there. Just plugs right into my phone and I can get to work with the metronome. Have we done an episode on metronomes yet? We should do that too.
No, we should. And one really nice thing about amps is just that they are so ubiquitously all over the place. It's really easy to find used amps. A lot of guitar players getting rid of their old gear all the time.
Yeah, and you don't need a fancy app to just crank away with metronome sounds. So you probably have, cousin Timmy. You probably have cousin Timmy who thought he wanted to play guitar but doesn't anymore, or thought he wanted to play keyboard and doesn't anymore, and they'll just give you the amp. So you just got to ask around and grab one, and then hook your iPhone metronome up to it. It'll be really good. And you can use the amp for other stuff too, if you want to dabble with some guitar or just listen to some bagpipe music in your practice room on a decent speaker or something like that. It's all fair game.
Yeah. So then you bring up the tube style manometer.
So you can see mine behind me as well.
Andrew, I have like a reel of tubing and a bunch of corks in my drawers over here, and I have had them for literally years. I've looked at dojo tutorials and stuff. I still have never put one together and used it. So maybe talk to me a little bit about manometers for any of us who might not know about them and how they work.
So you can become extremely steady and develop a great bagpipe tone without one. Like, that's how I learned. I never had a manometer. As a matter of fact, I thought they were cheesy and dumb for a really long time. And I remember Donald Lindsay would teach with them, and I was like, I never needed one of these. What do you need a manometer for? But then you start to think about it, and there are, some key things about producing good tonal quality that it sure would be nice to be able to see a visual representation of what you're shooting for. Interestingly, it's not so much the steadiness of the blowing that concerns me, but identifying the optimal pressure at which you should play your chanter reed. And it can be really difficult to just sort of explain that to someone and get them to be able to abstract that in their minds. And it's, it's much better to have that visual target. And that's where I really started advocating for manometer use, was when it came time to try and illustrate to people. It's like, well, you have a range of possible pressures you can play on your chanter reed. Which one's the best? Okay, well, it's the highest possible pressure we can blow before the reed starts to behave in unpredictable ways. That's sort of conceptually, theoretically, the best pressure in my experience. And then, so with the manometer, we can identify that, and then we can just sort of practice blowing steadily and making sure that we're, somewhere close to that bullseye. And then people can start to develop a really good intuition for sound. And then with the discovery of mental blowing anomalies, the manometer becomes even more useful. So yeah, highly recommend it. And as far as manometers go, we really do prefer the tube over the gauge style manometer, just for a couple of reasons. But it's just so visually good for learning. And also it tends to give you a sort of, I forget what Carl calls it. I think he calls it like a rolling average of your pressure, so that you'll be able to see like the consequences kind of with a long tail, like over the next 1 or 2 seconds, you'll see the effects of what your blowing did. The other thing I love about the manometer is if you're video recording yourself, you can see the manometer in the video, which is very difficult to get with the gauge. So anyway, there's a bunch of examples of why we prefer the tube manometer. But one of the best exercises you could do at all when it comes to bagpipe sound is to hook yourself into a manometer and then turn your back to the manometer and just play. But then when you review the video later, you can get the honest truth about whether or not you're blowing steadily and whether or not you are able to consistently keep things at that ideal pressure for your pipes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. In spite of not having assembled my manometer personally, I do have like a very clear and vivid memory when I was in high school in pipe band, and the instructor got out a Peterson 420 strobe tuner. I don't know if you've ever seen one of these before. It looks like a piece of equipment out of like...
I think I have one over there.
You have one? They're a big box, and I think that this kind of era of technology is so cool. Heavy metal dials and stuff like that, But she would park us in front of those. Well, and maybe you have a newer version. This was like school equipment. It was in the band room. It'd probably been there for a long time. But she'd park us in front of that, one person at a time. And for one entire class period, our job was just to play one note and keep it steady. And so it was like
Mm-hmm.
an hour and 20 minutes that I was standing there just trying to keep those strobes from spinning. And does it stand out in my mind because it was terrible torture, or because it had a positive effect on my playing? Maybe both. But
yeah. So the difficult thing with the tuner method is something that you hear about. You just have to be really careful there. There's a lot of confounding variables that can come into play using a tuner as opposed to a manometer. So I would just advise caution. I would advise caution there. For example, the pitch of your chantery,
the manometer's
is going to, the pitch of your chantery is going to change considerably over time as you play. And so insofar as being able to identify and hold something at the sweet spot, the tuner is probably not going to be able to provide that for you unless there's some sort of programmatic thing I'm not aware of. But, what we're really concerned with is internal bag pressure and not with pitch when it comes to producing good bagpipe tone. So, but yeah, it's a useful, fun thing to do, whether it's a tuner or a tube or a gauge, just becoming aware of your control or lack thereof of the air pressure inside the bag is pretty cool. Tube manometer's best overall.
And certainly, if nothing else, in terms of like cost to get it and put it together, like that's pretty. One trip to the hardware store and not much money, you're all set.
The gauges are really easy too. They're just not that useful for what I want to see. And that's my opinion.
Yeah. I also have an old medical gauge that, again, I've never set up. I've had it for years, intending, at some point to do so. What about mirrors? You bring up using a mirror to look at yourself while you play. Not something I enjoy doing personally, but why do you think it's good? Tell me about it.
I enjoy it a lot. I don't know. I just love looking at myself.
Maybe if I were a little better looking, but it's just like listening to myself in these exact podcasts. Not everybody I don't like hearing my own voice. Yeah, exactly. So I don't love seeing myself, but
well, I love it. That's what counts, Jim. That's what keeps me showing up on Tuesday mornings. So let's see. Mirrors. Yeah, just being aware of how you look when you play is super valuable. And highly recommend it. You could record yourself and that's okay. But I just love having that instant mirror feedback. I can keep an eye on my posture. I can make sure, one of the things that I regularly notice is whether or not my drones are just resting on my shoulder nicely and they're not moving around all funny like. I remember last year I was looking at the mirror and I was like, wait a minute, bro, like your drones are moving. You look like you're not in control over the instrument. And surely the drones moving around like that isn't ideal. So I made a couple of changes. I changed the drone cords a little bit closer together. Nothing crazy, but maybe they're a little bit far apart. And just looked at a couple posture things, and then I was able to correct that so that I'm a little bit happier with how I look. But yeah, just keep the mirror there. I think it's really good. Not a deal breaker if you don't have one, but you want to keep an eye on your posture, and you can get a nice like full body length size mirror from Walmart for like $12.
Yeah, can be had for cheap. And that's kind of the theme of this whole thing is this is stuff that you ought to want or need, and also here are affordable ways to get them. Now, what about how old were you when you first started playing, Andrew?
So I was around 8.
You were around 8. So you mentioned here that by the time you were 12 and went to an audiologist, you'd already had some measurable hearing loss, which is it's distressing for any of us who love music. How many of us would give up a lot of other senses before we'd give up our sense of hearing, and yet the music that we're playing is killing our sense of hearing.
I know.
For sure. You say it doesn't really matter what hearing protection you use. Use something. Go ahead.
It's like people who smoke. It's like, wait, what?
I love to breathe, so I breathe through this stick, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Bagpipes, the cigarettes of music.
You could forgive, I could forgive isn't the right word, but I can understand the thought process of smoking if you really love cigarettes. and it's like the thing you love the most. And so you're willing to sacrifice certain areas of health because you love cigarettes so much. But then that's not the impression I get with smokers. But anyway, it seems like an extreme analogy, but then you watch pipers who are just like, oh yeah, earplugs. Ugh, I don't want to play with earplugs. That's just stupid. It's like, what? Just put earplugs in. You could spend well under $100 to get like professional grade hearing protection that really makes it so that the quality of the sound is not affected at all of what you're hearing around you, right? It's just, those ones, they fit to your ear beautifully, and they've got those little filters. You can pick whatever filter you want. They're great. They're fantastic. I mean, right here, I just use, because I can't have nice things, I just use foam earplugs. You just pop them in your ears. They dampen the sound. They make it sound all warm and nice and wonderful. And that's what I use. Just do that. I was teaching a kids band recently, and I was shocked that like 2 out of the 25 kids in the band playing at band practice were wearing hearing protection. It's bananas.
Well,
you gotta be,
when you're young, you're invincible. Yeah. I never did. I don't think that's what it is. I became an old man before I started using hearing protection. It's like not until I had lost some hearing. I have it was partly because of a sickness I once had, but I have pretty significant hearing loss in my right ear. And realizing like I'm almost down to 1 ear. I'm like at 1.5 ears right now. That was when I finally started using it. And it's amazing to me too, Andrew, that like I've spent decades now professionally in the fields of like loss prevention and safety management. And if I walk into an auto shop or a factory or onto a job site, hearing protection is a pretty big deal. I see, pneumatic drills come up in your chapter. There better be some hearing protection, and yet I was playing my bagpipes, which are louder than pneumatic drills, with no hearing protection at all. If I'd seen that on a job site, it would have been a red flag right away.
And again, and drums are way worse. So the snare drummers, who ironically wear hearing protection far less often than even pipers do, it's just bonkers. It's not just made up, right? This is not a conspiracy from the foam earplug industry, because after you play your pipes for a while without hearing protection, you hear the tinnitus, right? That ringing in your ears is the cochlear hairs in your ear dealing with actual injury, right? And those hairs don't grow back.
Right.
Like once you lose them, they're gone, which is actually fascinating. Like, I sometimes wonder if the increasing pitch of bagpipes over the years is not due to widespread hearing loss, but I wonder if it covers up the effects, right? I wonder if the fact that the pitch does change covers up the damaging effects of all the hearing loss pipers have had, because I bet you if it stayed the same always, you would get to the point where you literally could not hear certain key harmonics.
That is a very interesting point. And it also makes me think maybe the poor snare drummers, like if they've been drumming for any significant amount of time, have just lost so much hearing that at this point to use hearing protection would make it so they couldn't hear their drum at all. So now they have to just
I doubt that.
Leave it out there.
But also, so snare drumming is like what you would call a broadband sound, right? So the snare drum is producing, it's not any specific frequency that a snare drum produces. It's just a wide range of basically all the available frequencies. It's like bright white light, kind of, there's all the frequencies are there at once. And so like that detail work, as far as like the fine pitches and stuff, probably isn't quite as urgent. But for the pipes, it definitely is, right? Your ability to hear those high level harmonics, that's a big part of being a good bagpiper. You got to be able to line all those up. You can't line them up if you physically can't hear them. So yeah, it just gets weird. Just wear hearing protection.
Yeah.
That's it.
Do you find that with hearing protection in, you can better pick out, like what you're listening for to tune, etc.?
Yes.
Because I do. That is one of the hurdles, I think, for a lot of us. If we've been playing for a while without hearing protection, when we first put it in, we sound different to ourselves. And so then it's like,
Yes.
wait, I can't tell if I'm in tune or not. And we just have to kind of relearn that, right?
Yep. Exactly. And it does take a shockingly long time to get used to the new sound when you wear hearing protection. Like it might be like a whole practice session and maybe another half practice session before you're used to it. So that's really long, you guys. Just a practice session and a half. Man, it's just
but
career
it'll extend
altering.
your,
I know.
What you might call your playable lifetime. It could extend that if it saves your hearing. So worth it. Yeah. Worth that whole session and a half.
I don't know. Call me crazy, but I want to preserve all of my senses as well as reasonably possible. And all you have to do as a bagpiper to do that is just find hearing protection that you can tolerate and stick them in your ears when you play.
Now, gathering essential maintenance items. Do you want to run through the list, or should we just tell people to buy the book?
Well, you could buy the book, but I mean, yeah, we can go through the list. The maintenance items are the list of maintenance items that you need is not a long list.
Not terribly long. 1, 2, 3, 4. We got 5 bullet points.
Let's see. I don't have the book open. Let me see if I can remember it. You need in my maintenance kit, I need hemp.
Mm-hmm.
Just trying to think. Like so there's 2 types of maintenance kits. There's what you actually need on you, and then there's what you need in your pipe case, not too far away. And what you actually need on you, you could do most of what you need with just a roll of hemp, can't you? Yeah, especially if you know how to break hemp without needing a knife. Yeah.
For me, hemp and tape. Those are the 2
a knife would be
helpful.
Yeah, but see, now chanter tape, I don't know if we've discussed this before, but I don't carry that around with me. I just have what I need on the chanter at all times, right? Like there's always a piece of tape above every hole for me when I play so that I don't have to worry about it. Just trying to think. I need all 3 of my digital tuners. No, we don't even need that. Let's see. What do we need? I think hemp is basically it.
Yeah.
Did I miss any?
For the take it with you, you have you do actually mention tape, though you could take that with you on the chanter as you suggest. And then the one other thing is, if you've got a hide bag, it might be a good idea to have a drumstick or something with some tie-in cord on it, just in case of an unexpected blowout kind of thing.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So I think the book complicates it, even though it's so simple in the book. It complicates it probably more than we need to. I mean, you really just need a roll of hemp. I don't carry a knife around all the time. You know, it gets weird once you're a bagpiper that goes on airplanes on a regular basis, I kind of like do most of what I can without ever bringing the knife with me if I can avoid it. Because one time I got caught at Kansas City with a giant knife trying to go through security. You know, it was this giant knife, and it had just got caught in the lining of the pipe case. And like the guy was looking at me, and I was like, I swear it was an accident. And he like threw it out.
That's not mine.
Can, and he was like, well, usually we have to report this. And I was like, Jesus, it was bad. Anyway, I digress. So yeah. And then corks are good to have around, but that's more of a practice room thing. Typically out of performance, you're not going to need corks, but in the practice room, the corks are handy for things such as testing the air tightness of your bag and so on and so forth. And maybe like working on the blow trick with just one drone going, you could use 2 drone corks. Those could come in handy. But digital hygrometer is big for me. I always have, I just have a bunch of them laying around. A hygrometer just tells you temperature and humidity of where you are. You probably can't see it, but there's one right here, and then there's one over there on the wall, and then I've got a bunch just kind of in various pipe cases and stuff too. That's just data that I would like to keep an eye on. And then you don't want to go too far without some tie-in string in the rare event of a joint blowout for a hide bag, and then you also want, whenever you travel anywhere, you want it for a few days, you want to make sure you have seasoning with you. You don't need to bring seasoning to the gig, right? But if you go away for a week, you want to have a can of seasoning with you. But that's basically it.
Yeah. Perfect. And then we hit this section where it's this how to set up your bagpipe. So you say more often than not, students or beginners might have a bagpipe setup that is radically too complex. And this creates many more problems for them than it solves. So you open up by saying like, avoid or remove these things. And the first two on there, a water trap and tone enhancers, are things that were in my bagpipes when I got them. Yep. And I did lose the water trap pretty quickly, mostly because it was a simple tube one and it got kind of moldy and gross. And I was like, what the heck? I'm just going to just toss it out. I think I've mentioned to you before, Andrew, it took me like 15 plus years to finally take my tone enhancers out of my drone stocks. Mm-hmm. They're out now.
It's actually kind of
I'm
a
happier
fun
now, but
it's a fun man on the street game to play. It's just when you're at the Highland Games, maybe not your local Highland Games because you'd be spotted. But if you go to just a miscellaneous Highland Games where no one really knows who you are, it's always fun to go to the bagpipe merchant's table and tell them that you're ready to buy a set of bagpipes and see what they try to sell you. I mean, it comes right in from the beginning. They try to sell you the tone enhancers, the moisture control system, the top of the line Ross canister bag, and all the imaginable gadgets. I mean, a merchant is sort of incentivized to do that. It's it's not the main reason, but it's one of the reasons we're not in the supplies business anymore. It's just because it's not, I don't want to be incentivized to like sell people stuff that they don't actually need. And it's tough when as a bagpipe merchant, the person is asking for, gadget 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, plus the new fancy digital tuner. It's like, I don't believe that's in their best interest, but then you sell it to them anyway, because that's what they say that they want, but it's kind of incongruent, right? But yeah, we want to use the simplest possible tools that we can to learn the basics of the instrument. It might surprise you to know, it might not surprise you, but it might surprise you to know that right now, as I play and prepare for the World Pipe Band Championships playing in grade 1, I mean, right now I have a bag and that's it. I don't play with a water trap or anything. I put a water trap in, a few days before I head off to Scotland, just because in the band we play tubes. And that's just what everybody does. So I do it, but certainly in North America, and I would love to dabble with it a little bit in Scotland to see, where the error of my ways lies, because it probably does, because everybody there that I know plays a tube. But it would be fun to try without. But yeah, what do you need a water trap for? What's a water trap even do?
Well, and speaking
topic for
of
another topic for another podcast.
Yeah. Are we all born wet or dry blowers? Is there any way to get free of it? Though regionally, where I live, you just about want to squirt water into your bag sometimes, and so doubly so. I have a hard time imagining why I'd want to have a water trap in there. But okay, too long in this condition. The 10 years rule. Let me tell you where I'm already in violation here. You say it's okay for our sticks and stocks to be old. Okay, cool. The bag right here, this bag right here, I've had this bag for 20 years, and it was used when I got it. Right. Shout out to Ganaway for making a solid product, but should I keep using it till it leaks, or should I already be worried about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, pipe bags are not like the thing that we're super concerned about here, especially for beginners and intermediates. I mean, if the pipe bag holds air really, really well, then typically we're probably okay with that, at least for starters. A bag that's super old might not handle moisture well, and it might just get super waterlogged sort of like quickly and easily, and not, and just not handle moisture that well. And in which case, I would say it's probably time for a switch pretty soon. And the same goes with synthetic bags. If they're holding air, you're fine, at least for now. I think where the 10 years rule comes in, and I would even go with a 5 years rule for some things as well, like drone reeds. If you're playing something that was, and the basic principle, it's just a guiding principle. It's not a dogmatic thing here, but a guiding principle is, if you're in the process of learning the bagpipes and learning the basics, we want to be playing on relatively recent equipment. That's the basic principle, right? So like 10 years is a good basic guideline. So the chanter that you're playing, right? As many of us know, chanters have changed a lot over the years.
Yeah.
And they continue to change year after year. So if you're playing a bagpipe chanter that's older than 10 years, you might be experiencing problems not due to you, but just due to the fact that chanter is kind of outdated. A modern reed made in 2023 might have a hard time sounding good in any chanter made in 2003. And again, that might not be true. And expert bagpipers, they might still be playing that chanter that they got in 1987 because that's how they get their hallmark sound. But I'm just talking about, generally speaking, for beginners, we want to be on relatively modern equipment just so that we can rule outdated equipment. We can rule that out when it comes to troubleshooting problems. That's the main reason. And then even the sticks, maybe 10 is probably aggressive, but if the drones are older than 30 or 40 years, it might be something to consider to get a more modern set, at least for the learning process. The legacy drones and the really awesome sounding drones from longer ago, they might indeed be awesome, but they might just need a little bit more experience to really get those puppies purring.
Yeah, this can be one of the tricky things of getting started. If you get started on a used set that you inherited from a family member or neighbor or friend, or if you get a used set, cheap on a classifieds page or something, there's value in preserving that set, but maybe you need to be a slightly more experienced piper to know how to handle that set, and it could become an obstacle for your learning. So that is a challenge.
Okay. Yeah.
So then one list to rule them all, you kind of,
by the way,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you're in that position where you're kind of using a hand-me-down set that's really old or whatever, it's just something you want to put on your radar. Just be aware of it. Maybe these pipes are something that I want to come back to, and maybe I could even borrow a more recent set from somebody, just to maybe test that theory. And then suddenly you realize, oh, it's way easier to tune my drones with these. And that just might be because it's more modern equipment that's sort of more ready to do the task right now. And those other pipes might sound amazing, but it's going to require mixture of tenor and bass drone and, different type of bag and more command over the absolute steadiness of the instrument or something like that.
Well, and I can imagine it being a not uncommon situation where a new piper might be living in a place where the pipe band that they're trying to play with is perhaps, run by people who are also relatively new or inexperienced pipers themselves. And so then when they're all together trying to get their pipes to play nice together, they might not realize, oh, wait a minute, Bill's chanter is from 1987 and Frank's is from, 2003. And then Sally's, is even older, and maybe not realizing that inherently is going to make it difficult, if not impossible, to get these pipes to play together.
Absolutely. 100%.
So you kind of wrap it up with a rehashing of the list. You kind of just give us here's the rundown of the bare essentials that you ought to either have or be looking to get as soon as you can. And that's kind of it. That's our shopping day. That's our retail therapy section of the book right there.
Yeah, it's kind of like anti-therapy, but it can be a big relief to just whittle things down to what you actually need and then to get after it. Simple tools is great. We want to eliminate all these fancy gadgets and complicating factors because then it's just us, and if there's a problem, you want to know, Carl always says this, if there's a problem, you want to know that it's you and that it's not some aspect of your gear that's very difficult to track down. You want to know that it's you. When I play a bagpipe, that's just a blowpipe and a bag of some kind and easy drone reeds and relatively modern drones, whatever, right? When I fire up that bagpipe and I either manage to get it sounding good or I don't, I know that it's because of me that's happening, and not because of some weird vacuum cleaner kitty litter thing inside my pipes.
Right.
Which, by the way, I said this on a previous episode, I'm not a moisture control hater. Okay. But that stuff is a complicated business. And bagpipes are complicated enough. Complex might be a better word. Bagpipes are complex enough without more stuff added in, right? So we got to get comfortable with the basic complexities of the instrument before we get into the complex complexities. For sure. That just seems obvious. The go-to analogy for me is, if you were going to learn to fly an airplane, would you prefer to learn on a, Boeing Dreamliner or a basic Cessna? Like, which plane would you prefer to learn the basics on? And I don't think you need to know anything about planes to know the answer. Right. And then as your general skill and knowledge and experience increases, then you can fly airplanes that contain more and more complexity, as that complexity is actually needed. I think the complexity of the Dreamliner is probably there to just ensure the absolute maximum safety for all the passengers, probably, and to deal with all sorts of contingencies that you might run into. But when you're beginning, you don't need to worry about that stuff yet.
So these gadgets, these moisture control systems and stuff like that, it's not no never. It's just not right away. Start with your plain vanilla ice cream and add sprinkles later, to use yet another analogy, right?
Yeah. Understand why you need it before you put it in. Right. And if you think you need it because otherwise your drone reeds are going to get wet, right? That's the exact reason I want you not to do it yet, because there are all sorts of common sense ways we need to learn to deal with moisture as bagpipers before we go to that extreme.